Hello again, my name's Adrian Gilbert, and if you are new to this channel, I tend to record programs about a mixture of things. At the moment I've been doing quite a bit on the book of Revelation and now on the book of Daniel. In fact, this is the third program in my series on the book of Daniel. And my approach is quite different from probably anyone else you're going to find on the internet. I'm not out to preach to you. I'm just very interested in trying to unravel prophecies. And I've done this not only with Christianity, but I've done whole books on Mayan prophecies, for instance, as this book I did, going deeply into the whole sort of Mayan connection with that. You remember that end date, 2012? All of that. And I do other books too, like my book Magi, which was exploring the sort of esoteric traditions of the Middle East prior to the time of Jesus and seeing what that had to say about that whole story about the three wise men. Where did they come from? What was their culture? What was the star religion that they were following? And going into all of that. So I'm not just a Bible basher, as you might put it. I'm actually much more interested in a wider picture than that. And I'm interested in seeing the prophecies and how they actually have come true, many of them, and what that means for our own times, which I do believe is the end of the present age. So that said, I want to press on and take you into this third part. Now, if you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, I'm going to put links down below so you can get hold of those as well. And I've got other programs on my channel if you care to explore around that. Adrian Gilbert 1, I think it is, on YouTube. Never remember. But anyway, so let's get on with this, with the secrets of the book of Daniel. And this is part 3, the end times. Now, first of all, I'm going to do a little recap. Let me put my reading glasses on for a minute. Now, in 604 BC, the Babylonians invaded Judea and captured Jerusalem. They deported to Babylon a number of high-ranking Jews, including Daniel, who was then a teenager. Other deportations occurred in 597 and 586 BC, at which point Jerusalem was destroyed, its temple looted and burnt. Right, so this is the time of the Babylonians, Babylonian Empire, Neo-Babylonian I should say, led by a guy Nebuchadnezzar. In the first invasion I think he was a prince and he had to go back because his father had died and went back to Babylon, and then he was king. So he's then the big king in Babylon. So now Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and Daniel interpreted King Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a symbolic statue. I go into this in detail in part 1, by the way. And he revealed that there would be a succession of world empires after Babylon that would rule over Jerusalem. This happened in history with the Medo-Persian, Greek, Roman, and successor states to Rome. The dream statue was hit by a stone from heaven, causing its collapse, and this would appear to be a reference to December 1917, when Jerusalem fell to the British. Now, I've gone into that again in earlier lectures, but this statue is kind of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and this stone, all of these are symbols that we're dealing with. So what we're exploring, I'm not saying there was actually a physical statue there and the stone came and crashed on it, This is a symbolic depiction in the dream, which Nebuchadnezzar had and then Daniel had subsequently. The stone seems to be a reference to the coronation stone of Great Britain, which I've explained in earlier lectures, which is often referred to as the Stone of Destiny or Jacob's Pillow. It is said to have been brought to the British Isles by Israelites fleeing the Middle East in ancient times. Now, I'm not going to go into all of that either at this point because I've talked about it a little bit before, and I am actually going to do some much more detailed lectures on all of that at some future date. But I just wanted to leave that with you for something to think about as we go forwards. Now, in part 2 of this investigation of the book of Daniel, we looked at further prophecies. These mostly concerned the destiny of the Jews, who subsequent to their deportation to Babylon. Daniel received this information not only through dreams, as in the earlier prophecies, but directly from angels who appeared to him. He's given details of what will happen over a period of 490 years, which is 70 weeks of days, after the issuing of the proclamation. Now, each day represents a year, so 70 weeks of years is 490 years. 470 weeks of days is 490 years, and 69 weeks, 483 years, brings us to the time of Jesus' ministry and death. The final week is separate and refers to the end times, when Jerusalem will again be invaded and destroyed prior to the return of the Messiah. Right, so this is not controversial. What I'm talking about here, you'll find many people will talk to you about that. This idea of the last week is somehow separate from the earlier 69 weeks. And I've gone into that in detail in part 2 of this analysis of the book of Daniel. Now, Daniel also meets the angel Gabriel, who gives him further information concerning Jerusalem and what will happen to it. Most of this information concerns the period when it is rebuilt till the coming of Jesus. At least that is how it is best interpreted. This is between 538 BC and circa 7 BC to 29 AD. That's the period of the time of Jesus, at least as I've worked it out. Other people have slightly different dates, but I believe that he was born in 7 BC and died in 29 AD. We're then told its, which is Jerusalem's, end will come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. It's not very happy. At first sight, this prophecy seems to apply to the destruction of Jerusalem during the time of Vespasian. He was a Roman emperor. Actually, he wasn't emperor at the time of this, I don't think. In 70 AD. However, although the Romans did destroy the city, there's no record of any flood at that time. So I think that's an important point to make. The prophecy says, there's going to be a flood. In fact, it goes on about some of the other prophecies in the Bible talk about how at the end times that Jerusalem will be split, that the Mount of Olives will be split, and there'll be water coming out in both directions. So that didn't happen at the time of Vespasian, so we can dismiss that. It's going to happen when there's a big earthquake. Of that you can be certain. Nevertheless, a major earthquake leading to a massive flood is predicted elsewhere in the Bible. These prophecies for a Jerusalem flood seem to apply to the end times, so graphically described in the book of Revelation. So as I said, I'm doing lectures on the book of Revelation. I think I'm up to about chapter 10, 11 at the moment. I've got quite a bit more to do on that, and I shall space it out over a period of time. I want to do other things as well. But that's all in the book of Revelation, which is a fantastic book. If you've never read it, It's the last book in the Bible. I recommend it. It'll blow your mind. Right. Daniel now has another remarkable vision. This takes place in the third year of Cyrus, the king of Persia. He conquered Babylon, and again I've gone into that in earlier lectures. And the king of Persia, he has the vision in 536 BC. Daniel has a vision while standing on the bank of the Tigris River. Right, the Tigris River is the one that flows down. These days Baghdad is built on it, but Baghdad didn't exist in Daniel's day. But it goes on down through Iraq, as we would call it, or Mesopotamia, as they call it then. He sees a man clothed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz, or fire, as a city, around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like a multitude, which means it's very loud. Right? Now this is almost the same as the description John gives at the start of the Revelation, when he meets the first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega, the similar kind of figure that appears to St. John. St. John on Patmos is having his vision, or visions, about the revelation at the end of the world, and this figure, very reminiscent of what Daniel's been talking about, appears to him. And as we go on in the book of Revelation, so we realize that this figure is actually representative, or is the spirit or soul of Jesus Christ himself, who appears to him. And this is what he writes in the Revelation. I saw one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like flame of fire, his feet like burnished bronze refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of many waters, his face like the sun shining in full strength. So you can see that's actually quite similar to the description that Daniel gives in his book of this being that he meets. And actually the way I look at it is that the Revelation is actually a continuation of the book of Daniel. And in my feelings, my way of looking at it, I believe in reincarnation. I know that's not popular with many Christians, but there were Christians in the early church who did believe in reincarnation. And in fact, Jesus himself says pretty categorically that John the Baptist was the reincarnation of Elijah. And I think St. John was the reincarnation of Daniel. But that doesn't really matter. We have the sense that John is carrying on the work that was begun by Daniel with his prophecies, and he's taking them much further. Now then, Daniel, like John, falls to the ground. And he writes, no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. Then I heard the sound of his words, and as I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face in deep sleep, with my face to the ground. That's Daniel chapter 10, 8-9. We're doing actually chapters 10, 11 and 12 in this lecture, I should tell you. The being who has appeared to him revives him. And behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand upright, for now I have been sent to you. Right? So he's reassuring Daniel and putting strength back in him. And actually the same thing happens to John at the start of the Revelation. And this is almost identical to the experience St. John has at the beginning of the Revelation or Apocalypse. And he writes, when I saw him, the figure, I fell at his feet, as though dead. But he had his right hand on me, saying, fear not, I am the first and the last, and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. This is why I say it's clear that this is the Jesus figure who died and was resurrected and went to heaven. And so John recognizes who he is now. John's account makes it clear that the being he meets is Jesus Christ, the one who died and is alive. His arrival was prophesied centuries earlier in the book of Daniel. What is interesting here is that the being in John's revelation is more powerful than he was at the time of Daniel. In other words, the incarnation as a human being, death on the cross, resurrection and ascension has given Jesus extra authority with regard to planet Earth. Now, that might need some explaining for some people because, we all believe Jesus is all powerful. He's God. He's God the Son. Why wouldn't he be able to just take control of the situation? But the thing is that God plays by the rules, and there are certain rules to do with planets and their rulership. And I'll go into that a little bit more shortly. And Jesus has to establish his authority before he can start exerting it. We know this because he tells Daniel that he needed to get help. In other words, this figure that appeared to him needed to get help in order to break through whatever barrier was preventing him from contacting Daniel earlier. So he writes, "Then he said to me, 'Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I've come because of your words.'" Now this is important. "The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. Right? "But Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days. For the vision is for days yet to come." In other words, he's been delayed in Persia by the prince of Persia. And we're given to understand, and actually there's quite a lot of angelology in the book of Daniel, which is interesting in its own right. We're given to understand that each nation has its own prince. And the word prince, comes from princeps, means first, the first of whatever it is that you're dealing with. So there is this sense of every nation having its own prince, just as a Prince of Wales, for example, we have here. But these princes are not physical. They're angelic beings who administer that nation. So each nation has its own prince. This is kind of a bit of angelology we're getting from the book of Daniel. And he's telling us here that he's been held up by this prince in Persia and the kings there for 21 days. Daniel's been praying for 21 days. So that's the duration. I mean, he would have come straight to him, but he's been held up there. And Prince of Persia, well, the Persians are ruling over Babylon at this time. So you've got to understand that they've got a certain power, and the Prince of Persia has control over this area, particularly, the Tigris, that Daniel is trying to break through their barrier they've put up to stop him contacting higher levels. So he had to get help from Michael, who's the prince of the Jews and the Israelites, to come and help him so he could overcome the Prince of Persia. So the 21 days he was delayed correspond to the 3 weeks Daniel has been praying. But these words also give us insight into the power structure in the angelic world, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit. Now, so what does it mean if an angel is called a prince? Now, I make recourse to Robert Flood, who's someone I rather admire. He was an Englishman who lived in the 16th century, and he was a great mystic, and wrote a lot of books and produced some marvellous diagrams, which I like to use in my lectures. So here we can see, this diagram represents the descent of the soul from God, who's at the top, shown as that sort of rays coming out at the very top. And then the soul has to progress down through these spheres around the earth, and you can see it goes round in a spiral form, going down through one sphere after another, till eventually it incarnates on the earth in the middle. Now, some of these spheres are angelic spheres that the soul has to go through before it gets down to the planetary spheres, and then the elemental spheres, and then it enters into the atmosphere of the earth, and it comes down to earth. There's a newborn baby. This is the angelology, if you like, of Robert Flood. But the thing I want to show you here is that the angelic spheres, that there's 9 of them, divided into 3 groups of 3. But it's generally recognized that there are 9 spheres of angels. You find that in many different books. I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, and this was taught to us. It was in the catechism in those days. I don't know if it is now. But anyway, there's the idea that there are 9 different hierarchies of angels. And they start off, they're in 3 choirs or groups. And group 1 are the seraphim, the cherubim, and the dominions. Those are the ones who are closest to the Godhead. And you can see them marked on the diagram here, 2, 3, and 4. The seraphim, the cherubim, and the dominions. And then immediately below them are group 2, which are the thrones, the potentates, or powers, and the principalities, or the princes. And then below them in group 3, you have the virtues, the archangels, and the angels. Right? So we have this hierarchy of angels, with different levels of authority to them, ruling over the universe underneath God and the mind of God, men's, which he mentions also. So where does that leave us with our Daniel situation? It's not at all clear what all this means. However, we can see that the principates, i.e. the princes, are in group 7, right? So you can see there, they're group 7. And we generally think of Michael as an archangel. However, according to the words in Daniel, he is the angel assigned to protect the people of Israel. And this would seem to put him in the level of either thrones or dominions. And these are both higher than the principates, or princes. Why does the entity who is identifiable with the first and last, the Alpha and the Omega of John's revelation, have difficulty overcoming the resistance of the Prince of Persia? I think it could be because in Daniel's day, Jesus had not yet gone through the crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. Thus his full authority on earth was not yet fully established. As I said, God plays by the rules. And the ruler of our planet is our friend Satan. Jesus himself tells us that when he's tempted in the after the baptism. He goes for 40 days and 40 nights, and he's in the wilderness and he's tempted by the devil. And the devil offers him the kingdoms of the world, and Jesus turns it down. You can only offer him the kingdoms of the world if he is the ruler of this world. And Jesus does later on in the Gospels actually tell us that the devil is the ruler of this world. So we're given to understand that there's a spiritual warfare going on all the time on earth. There are the forces of God, angels, archangels, cherubs, and so on, but opposed to them is a hierarchy of demonic forces. Satan, we're told by Jesus himself, is the prince of this world, and that's in Matthew 4, 1-11. And Jesus is tempted by the devil. Jesus is tempted by the devil. Finally, the devil took Jesus to a very high mountain. He showed him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory. If you bow down and worship me, he said, I will give you all this. Jesus said to him, Get away from me, Satan. It is written, worship the Lord your God. He is the only one you should serve. So it's because Satan is the prince of this world that he can make the offer to Jesus. Just as there is a hierarchy of angels in heaven, so there is also a hierarchy of fallen angels here on earth among these princes. So we've got Satan, who's the prince of planet Earth, and below him there are archdemons, the fallen angels such as Samyaza, Azazel, Amazalak, and false gods such as Tammuz, Baal, and Moloch, and pagan divinities such as the Aztec and Mayan gods, and so on. And below them there are regular demons who in the Arab world they call the jinns or genies. And they're tasked with tempting people to sin. They want to prevent souls from leaving this planet and going back to heaven. Now, this is a whole other subject, and I'm not going to go into it in any further depth than this, other than to say that there is an alternative hierarchy on this earth, and a lot of the troubles that we have on earth are caused, well, most of them are caused by these demonic influences, and their prince is Satan. Now, the word prince means first, I said that earlier, or highest authority. The prince is the number one of a region, principality, country, or whatever. The prince of a planet is its spiritual ruler. For the vast majority of planets, their ruler will be a high angel that is true to the word of God, or Logos. And I've done lectures on the Logos doctrine and what that means. In fact, I want to do more on that. However, our planetary ruler is a fallen angel, Satan. This is what causes so much trouble for us humans here on Earth, and I can't stress that too strongly. We live on a fallen planet, and it's not just Adam and Eve that fell. There are already fallen angels here, tempting them in the garden, for example. And this is what the whole plan of God is. God being the intelligence of the entire universe, and the angels and principalities and so on working through, with him, under him, aiming to bring this planet back. That's the redemption of Earth is what it's all about. It's not only about the redemption of mankind, it's about the redemption of the Earth as well. And we find it hard, indeed almost impossible on our own, to reconnect with God. Well, that's true, isn't it? You try doing it on your own. There's all these principalities and demons and what have you in between you and the higher spheres. And you're trying to do something good. So, the mission of Jesus as Messiah or Christ is to take down Satan and his empire. His job is to re-establish the kingdom of heaven on earth. You read about that in the Bible all the time. The first stage of this was accepting a horrific death on the cross, followed by conquering death itself by the resurrection of his body and ascension into heaven. In other words, he exercised supernatural authority over Satan. Satan could not confine him with death. He overcame him. The third stage will be the return of Jesus to rule as king of the earth. Satan will be locked up for 1,000 years. How do I know that? That's what's written in the book of Revelation. Read it. After this, he will be allowed to tempt again for a short time. In other words, he's going to be locked up. So there's not going to be any temptation going on during that 1,000 years while things are set straight. And people are given the opportunity, those who are here anyway, to cleanse themselves and prepare themselves for the next world, whatever that is going to be. And remember, there's a huge universe up there. Yeah, it's a tiny little planet Earth down here going around the sun. Even in the Milky Way, there are billions of other stars, and there's billions of other galaxies like the Milky Way. We don't know what other levels there are. That's just the physical, what we can see. We don't know what other levels are. The universe is beyond our imaginations, and we are a tiny part of it down here on Earth. So we've got a lot to explore in eternity. At least I'm looking forward to it, aren't you? So he's coming back down here. He's going to establish his kingdom of heaven on earth. And Satan will be locked up for 1,000 years, and then after that, be allowed to tempt again for a short time. Those who pass the final test will be able to leave earth as spirits and go to heaven. Satan will be destroyed in fire, and his rebellion will be ended. And there's a whole section at the end of the book of Revelation about the descent of the New Jerusalem, this great symbolic new city of Jerusalem, and how the elect are able to go in there through 12 gateways. I'll go into that sometime when I'm doing the book of Revelation lectures, but there's so much more to Christianity, believe me, than just going to church on Sunday, keeping your nose clean and hoping for the best when you die. Now, we come to chapter 11 of Daniel. And Daniel is told how history will progress by the being who touched him, who appears to be the same as the Alpha and the Omega in Revelation, and therefore Jesus Christ in spirit. And the prophecy begins with a recap concerning the destruction of the Persian Empire by Alexander the Great. Now that's all in lecture 2. On his death, the empire is split into 4. And the prophecy continues, but focusing on a series of wars between the kings of the south, who are the Ptolemies of Egypt, and the kings of the north, which is the Seleucids, or the descendants of Seleucus, who ruled over Syria, parts of Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and Persia. Although the Seleucid Empire was larger, it is disunited, or was disunited and fractious. Thus, the effective power of the kings of the north is mostly no more than the kings of the south. So they have a kind of seesawing. The king of the north invades Egypt and goes through Palestine, invades Egypt. And then he gets thrown back, and the king of the south comes up, and he invades Palestine and goes on to Syria. And then they come back the other way, and they go backwards and forwards. And this section of chapter 10, or is it 11, explores that in great detail, and I'm not going to go into it here. You can look it up in other places. People have traced the exact correspondence with history between the wars that we have recorded, and there were 4 major wars between the Egyptians and when I say Egyptians, the Ptolemies were a Greek dynasty, as were the Seleucids. So these 2 dynasties of Greeks fighting it out, particularly for control of Palestine. The warfare to's and fro's from the time of Antiochus to the time of Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Now his worst crime was defiling the temple of Solomon by placing in it a statue of Zeus. Zeus is the kind of Greek version of Jupiter. And he declared that he himself was the incarnation of Zeus and should therefore be worshipped as such. Right? Can you believe the hubris of this guy, right? He goes into the Temple of Solomon and he clears out the other stuff that's in there. I should stress by that time the Ark of the Covenant had long since disappeared. But he clears out the other stuff, and he has a statue of Zeus put in and tells everyone, look, I'm Zeus, I'm the incarnation of Zeus, you bow down and worship me. Well, of course, they're not going to do that if they're honest. If you're a Jewish person, you're not allowed to do that. So he then punished those people, and he was actually quite ruthless. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate, which is the statue of himself as Zeus. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. For example, he bans circumcision among the Jews and installs a false high priest. I should tell you that the high priest has to be born from a certain family. He takes a bribe from someone else who wants to be high priest, who's not of the right family. I think it's the Kohanim or something like that. So, this guy is really corrupt, really bad person. And he becomes a symbol then of the abomination that makes desolate. But the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. Now, he caused a rebellion of the people known as the Maccabees, by Judaeus Maccabeus. And they set up a new kingdom, actually, in Jerusalem for a short time. It's known as the Hasmonean dynasty. And that, I haven't got the dates in my head, I think it's around about 165 BC, until the time of Herod, which would be around about 30 BC. I think it was the Hasmonean period. So there was a time, the David kings have long since gone. Then there's this Hasmonean dynasty, the Maccabees, and the books of Maccabees you can read in the Catholic Bible. They're not in a Protestant Bible. And they rebelled against Antiochus Epiphanes and drove him out. And the king shall do as he will. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, i.e. the Greek gods, or to the one beloved by women, which is the Syrian god Tammuz. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honour the god of fortresses, which is Mars. Right? And that's in Daniel 11:36 to 37. We have another quote here. But news from the east and north, which is in Persia, shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea, and I think this must be the Caspian Sea, and the glorious holy mountain. Not sure where that is, but they do actually have a holy mountain in Persia, so it might be that mountain, not far from Tehran. Yet he shall come to his end, with none to help him. And in fact, Antiochus did die miserably in Persia during that campaign. Antiochus, the career of Antiochus, taking away the burnt sacrifice, exalting himself above every god, demanding people worship him. He kind of like the model for what that later Antichrist is going to do. Now, the prophecies now segue seamlessly from the end of Antiochus in 164 BC to the end of days, i.e. our own times. And chapter 12, the last in the book, gives glimpses of what is to come some 2,500 years after Daniel's visions. Now, what I'm going to give you here now is my own interpretation. I know other people probably have their interpretations of some of these figures and prophecies. This is the best I can come up with. And if you've got a better interpretation, let me know. But I think this fits rather, what I'm going to tell you fits rather well with what we do know about history in our own times. So it carries on. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as has never been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people, the Jews, shall be delivered, every one whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. Now I think that means reincarnate, but maybe they're going to wander around as ghosts. I think they're going to reincarnate. Some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Right, so this idea of this time of trouble, such as has never been seen before, is very much in line with what Jesus himself prophesied in the Matthew Gospel in chapter 24, when he talks about time of troubles and awful things happening, run for the hills. Read that. It's his Mount of Olives sermon that he gave to his disciples as they're overlooking Jerusalem. And part of that, what Jesus is prophesying, concerns the destruction of Jerusalem by Vespasian. But part of it is to do with the end of the world, or the end of the age, I should say. Now, the prophecy, I believe, refers to the first half of the 20th century and the two world wars, and that's what's going to come next in Daniel. These, especially the second, were conflicts on a scale never before seen. That's the First and Second World Wars. Do you realise that more people died in the Second World War than in any other conflict in history? I mean, it's just massive. Some of the things that we've been told would happen, wars and rumours of war. They also had huge impact upon the destiny of the Jewish nation. That's the First and Second World War. In 1917, British forces drove the Turks out of Jerusalem and thereby cleared the way for the return of the Jews. I'm sure they weren't thinking about that at the time. Maybe some of them were. But the effect of that was to clear the way for the return of the Jews. Shortly after the Second World War, in 1948, the Jewish state of Israel was established. And in 1967, in the Six-Day War, the Jews took control of Old Jerusalem and liberated the city of David. And I'm going to go into that in a little more detail. So it carries on in Daniel. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. There's a reference to a sealed book, which seems to hint at the unfolding story near the start of the book of Revelation. Here there is a symbolic description of a sealed book being opened, one seal at a time, by the Lamb of God, who symbolizes Jesus Christ himself. That the time of the end is near is implied by the last sentence. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. The 20th century, and even more the 21st century, has seen an explosion both in travel and knowledge. So this prophecy has been fulfilled. So it carries on now. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others stood, one on this bank of the stream, that's the Tigris, and one on that bank of the stream. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who I say is Jesus, who was above the waters of the stream, how long shall it be till the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things will be finished. Right, so we get that repeated again in the book of Revelation, where it talks about the time, times, and half a time. And indeed, this is the end of the shattering of the holy peoples. And then we get the descent of the New Jerusalem and all of that I was telling you about earlier. But there's a couple of other prophecies here which are very specific in terms of dates and times. And I'd like us to look at those now. And Daniel carries on, I heard, but I did not understand. Then I said, O my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things? And he said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. And from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of days. So we have this very specific prophecy given here for these two time periods, 1,290 days and 1,335 days. Now, it's not easy to interpret this one, but I have some ideas and I'm going to share them with you, and I think I'm on the right track. But again, if you've got a better explanation that fits the evidence, I'd love to hear. But I think I've got a good understanding of this, but we'll see. So what means these periods of time that end the book of Daniel? In my opinion, they relate in some way to Jerusalem. Everything else relates to Jerusalem, so these must be as well. The abomination that makes desolate is a reference to something akin to the time when Antiochus Epiphanes took over the city, stopped the daily sacrifice, and turned the temple into a sanctuary for himself as a god. And this is regarded as an abomination. Thus, this passage refers to something similar yet to take place. When I say yet to take place in the time of Daniel. And I believe this reference is to a period of time when Jerusalem would come under Muslim rule. Now, no, I don't want to, insult Muslims in any way here, but we are looking at this from the perspective of the Jewish people. Now, the First World War brought about decisive changes to the Middle East. British forces under the command of Field Marshal Edmund Allenby advanced into Palestine in November 1917. They reached Jerusalem in early December. The city surrendered as with the Turkish garrison fleeing without a shot being fired. And Allenby entered the city on foot and took its formal surrender on the 11th of December 1917. Now, I just want to add here, it wasn't necessarily the Turks would be cowards and running away. What they saw in immediate days before this were planes. The British actually had a squadron of fighter planes and these biplane bombers, and they were buzzing over the city, and they were actually quite frightened that if they hung around that bombs might fall on the holy places. That's how I interpret that. So they withdrew from Jerusalem. I'm being perhaps a little modest here, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt that that's what was going on. And this was a pivotal moment from the point of view of prophecy. It marked the end of a 2,520-year period, which is 7 times 360 years, since the first capture of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 604 BC. And a period of 2,560 years represented 7 times of punishment on Judah for their apostasy. Thenceforth, things would change, that's at the end of that period, and the Jews would be able to return to Israel. So we have this, Daniel himself was one of the people taken away in 604 BC, and that period of 2,560 years, was it 20 years? Let me get it right. 2,520 years represented the period of punishment for the apostasy, when immediately previous to that period, they've been doing terrible things, sacrificing children to Baal and Moloch and things like this. There were terrible things that had gone on. And that's why Jerusalem was given to the Babylonians, and this punishment period, what that's known as the times of the Gentiles, began then. And that came to an end in 1917, when Jerusalem was liberated by British forces. Why British? Well, I'll explain that in later lectures. Now, Muhammad died, and the first Rashidun Caliphate was established in 632 AD. And this is in many respects the true start of the Muslim era, just as the Christian era begins with the departure of Jesus. In other words, the death of Muhammad himself marks the start of a period when the Muslims are waiting for Muhammad to come back, just as the Christians are waiting for Jesus Christ to come back. So just as the Christian era sort of begins with the death, crucifixion, the death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ, so the Muslim era begins with the death of Muhammad, and they're waiting for his return. That's how I'm interpreting this. And remember, we're doing this from a Bible point of view. We're not doing it from a Quranic point of view. 632 seems to be an important year, prophetically speaking. Without doubt, it had been Muhammad's intention to capture Jerusalem and turn it into a Muslim city. So, although Jerusalem was not captured by the Muslims until, I think, 637, going on 638 AD, there was already the intention was established. I know I'm being a little bit vague here, but bear with me. This seems to be the year that the prophecies are pointing to, and I'll explain why in a second. If we add 1,290 years, that's the first period that was given in this last bit of prophecy, to AD 632, it comes to AD 1922. So we've got 632 plus 1290 equals 1922. So what happened then in 1922? Well, from 1919 to 1920, a peace conference was held in Paris. One of its chief purposes was to establish the New World Order after the war had eliminated the Ottoman Empire. I mean, Britain and France and the Allied powers had captured, most of the Ottoman Empire, apart from Turkey itself. I mean, what is Turkey now? As victorious allies, the British, led by David Lloyd George, you see him there on the right, holding his cane with his top hat on, and French President Georges Clemenceau, I think he was a president, raising his hat, and he's on the left-hand side there. They set about carving out spheres of influence in the Levant and beyond. The Levant is the area of the east side of the Mediterranean, incorporating what's now part of Syria on the coast, Lebanon and Israel. So that's known as the Levant. And the principal French sphere was to be Lebanon and Syria. And that's why they still speak French in those areas today. While the English were to run Palestine and Jordan. However, there still needed to be an international agreement on these proposals. In other words, the British and French had sort of worked out what they wanted, but it needed some kind of international recognition. So in 1922, the League of Nations, the forerunner to the United Nations, confirmed the British mandate over Palestine and the French in Syria and Lebanon. We can see it there. And the treaty, in line with the earlier Balfour Declaration, allowed for Jewish settlement in Palestine but not in Transjordan. So it said very clearly that the Israelis, or the Jews, were not to settle in Transjordan, but they could settle in Palestine. In other words, it laid out a legal framework for a new state of Israel. So that happens in 1922, which is exactly 1,920 years after 632 and the start of the Abbasid Caliphate with the death of Muhammad. And I think that's what that date is meant to be linked to. And this was not dissimilar to the declaration of King Cyrus in 538 BC that the Jews could return to their homeland to rebuild their temple. Thus, the 1,290-year prophecy of Daniel can be said to have been fulfilled in 1922. And Daniel's final prophecy ends with the cryptic numerology. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. And that's Daniel 12:12. So what's that all about? Well, how does this fit with the earlier prophecy? Well, if you subtract 1,290 from 1,335, it comes to 45. Then 45 years added to 1922 brings us to 1967. As extraordinary as this may seem, this is the year of the Six-Day War, in which the Israelis defeated the armies of Egypt, Syria and Jordan, along with detachments from other Arab countries. And they did it all in 6 days. This victory seemed God-given. More to the point, as a result of this conflict, the Israelis gained full control over Old Jerusalem, including the City of David and the Temple Mount. This seems to be what the angel was alluding to when he spoke to Daniel in 538, actually it should be 536 BC. It's an amazing prophecy. So, blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days, Well, there were people alive then, Jewish people in Israel, who had been alive in 1922. So, they're 45 years later, there'd have been young men at the time, 1922, and now there'd be old men and women, of course, at the time of the Six-Day War and the success there. So it all ties in very, very well. And I have done other things about the 1948 date as well, but that's in other lectures. So now, this concludes our exploration of the book of Daniel. And if you've not already watched parts 1 and 2, then I would urge you to now. And I'm going to put links in underneath here in the bottom. I hope I won't forget when I upload all this. Remember also that the book of Daniel is in many respects a prequel to the book of Revelation or Apocalypse of St. John, which is the final book in the Bible, and gives much more detail concerning prophecies for the end of the age. Yeah. And I've recorded, I think it's over 12 lectures regarding the Revelation, and I'll be adding lots more in due course. You don't want to miss out on these lectures, as I provide information you'll not find anywhere else. I can promise you that. Some of the things I've put in these lectures, the things come to me. I get inspired, and then things are shown to me. I'm not going to say, I don't claim to be a prophet, right? That's not my claim. But I am a very good investigator, and I do have a strange ability to be able to put jigsaw puzzles together of different ideas. If you read my books, you'll understand what I'm saying. And I've been doing that with this book of Revelation, and I think I am guided. So I offer that to you. They're there on YouTube for you to explore. If you don't want to, that's your own business. I'm not concerned. But they're there for those who care. So thank you very much for your time and for your patience in going through all this with me. I'm also going to be doing a lot of other shorter lectures, and I realise that some of these lectures are quite long and people find that too much. Some people do. So I am going to try to do more shorter ones as well. But until next time, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.